Have you ever laid down at night, your body completely still, yet your mind feels like it just started running? You close your eyes, hoping for rest, but instead, thoughts begin to line up, one after another. A conversation from earlier replays. A small mistake suddenly feels bigger than it should, and somewhere in the quiet, a question appears. Why is it so hard to simply rest? Maybe you've told yourself, I'm just tired. But if you look a little deeper, you might notice something else. It's not your body that's exhausted. It's your mind that has been working all day, without pause. Even in moments when nothing is happening, the mind continues. It plans what could go wrong tomorrow. It replays what should have gone differently yesterday. It analyzes things that don't need solving. And slowly, without you even realizing it, this constant movement becomes your normal. There's a quiet kind of tiredness that comes from this. Not the kind sleep can fix overnight, but the kind that builds, little by little, from never truly having a moment of inner stillness. You might be lying in bed, lights off, the world silent. But inside, it feels like a room where someone forgot to turn off the noise. And here's something we rarely pause to consider. What if you're not tired because you've done too much, but because your mind has never been allowed to rest? There was a time today, maybe a very small moment, when you were doing something simple, drinking water, looking out the window, or just sitting quietly. And for a brief second, there were no thoughts, no worries, just a soft, almost unnoticed sense of calm. And then, the mind came back. In Buddhist wisdom, this isn't seen as a problem to fight, but as something to gently understand. Because peace isn't something far away that you need to chase, and it's something that quietly appears when the mind stops holding on. So for now, you don't need to fix anything. You don't need to force your thoughts to disappear. Just stay here and listen. Because sometimes, the first step toward rest is simply realizing that you've been running for far too long. 1. The invisible exhaustion. But there is something most people don't notice. The deepest kind of exhaustion is the one no one can see. You might remember what we just touched on. The feeling of lying still, yet somehow not at rest. And maybe, if you look closer at your own days, you'll begin to notice a quiet pattern. You go through your routine, you complete your responsibilities, you even take breaks. And yet, something inside you never truly slows down. It's a strange kind of tiredness, not the kind that shows on your face, not the kind others ask about, but something softer, hidden underneath everything. You can be sitting in a quiet room, doing nothing at all, and still feel drained. You can wake up after a full night of sleep and still feel like you didn't really rest. And that's because the body may have stopped, but the mind never did. All day long, it continues working in the background, not loudly, not always noticeably, but constantly. It replays small moments. It anticipates things that haven't happened. It tries to solve problems that don't even exist yet. And over time, this creates a quiet but steady drain. Have you ever noticed how sometimes, after a long day of doing nothing special, you still feel unusually tired? Not because the day was heavy, but because your mind never had a single moment of true stillness. There's a kind of pressure we carry that doesn't come from the outside world. It comes from the constant activity inside. And the difficult part is, because this exhaustion has no visible signs, we often ignore it. We tell ourselves, I'm fine. We assume this is just how life is supposed to feel. But deep down, something feels off. In Buddhist understanding, this isn't seen as a flaw in who you are, yet it's simply the natural result of a mind that has never been taught how to rest. The mind, by its nature, keeps moving. It jumps from one thought to another, like a restless wind that never settles. And if we never learn how to gently step back from that movement, we begin to live inside it. There's a quiet image that comes to mind. Imagine someone sitting by a window late in the evening. The world outside is calm. The lights are soft. Everything is still. But inside, their thoughts keep circling. They replay a conversation from earlier that day, wondering if they said the wrong thing. They think about tomorrow. What might go wrong? What needs to be fixed? Nothing urgent is happening in that moment. And yet, their mind is working as if it cannot afford to stop. And slowly, they become tired. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but in a way that builds over time, almost unnoticed. Have you ever found yourself in that same quiet moment where everything around you is peaceful, but inside feels crowded? And that is the invisible exhaustion. And the reason it feels so heavy is because it never gets released. Physical work has an end. You finish the task and the body rests. But mental activity, if left unobserved, has no natural stopping point. It continues into the evening. It follows you into your bed. It lingers even in your sleep. And without realizing it, you begin to carry it everywhere. But here is something gentle to consider. What if the problem is not that your mind is too active, but that it has never been given permission to pause, not forced to stop, not controlled, but simply allowed to rest? Because most of us were never taught this. We were taught how to think, how to solve, how to analyze, but not how to sit quietly without needing to do anything. So the mind keeps doing what it has always done, and we keep feeling tired without fully understanding why. There's nothing wrong with you for feeling this way. In fact, and this quiet exhaustion might be the first sign that something inside you is ready to change, ready to slow down, ready to breathe, ready to experience a different way of being. But that shift doesn't begin by forcing the mind to be quiet. It begins with something much simpler, just noticing. Noticing how often the mind is moving, noticing how rarely it rests, noticing the weight it quietly carries. And in that noticing, something begins to soften. Because the moment you become aware of the movement, you are no longer completely lost inside it. And maybe, just maybe, that is where true rest quietly begins. 2. The mind that never stops talking. And this is where something even more subtle begins to reveal itself. The exhaustion you feel is not only from thinking, but from a voice inside that never truly falls silent. If you gently return to that quiet moment we spoke about, the one where you're sitting by the window at night, everything around you calm, you may notice something, even when there is nothing happening outside. There is still a conversation happening within. A voice begins to narrate your life. It comments on what you did earlier. It replays what you said, and what you should have said instead. It predicts what might happen tomorrow, often imagining the worst. It judges, compares, questions, and analyzes almost automatically. And over time, this voice becomes so familiar that you no longer question it, and it simply feels like you. But have you ever paused and really listened to it? Not to follow it, but just to notice how constant it is. There are moments during the day, perhaps while you're working, driving, or even scrolling on your phone, when this voice fills every gap of silence. It doesn't wait to be invited. It doesn't ask for permission. It just continues. And because it has always been there, we begin to believe that this constant thinking is normal, that this is just how the mind works, that this is who we are. But slowly, this endless narration starts to shape how we experience life. A small comment from someone stays in your mind longer than it should. A simple mistake turns into a long chain of self-criticism. A future event becomes a source of anxiety long before it even arrives. And without realizing it, you are no longer just living your life. You are living inside your thoughts about life. There's a quiet kind of heaviness that comes from this, and not because life itself is too much, but because the mind keeps adding more to it. In Buddhist understanding, this inner voice is not seen as something to fight or eliminate. It is simply part of the mind's habitual movement. But the suffering begins when we become completely identified with it. When every thought feels like truth. When every judgment feels like reality. When every worry feels necessary. There's a simple image that might feel familiar. Imagine someone walking home after a long day. Nothing particularly bad happened. The day was ordinary. But as they walk, their mind begins to replay a brief interaction with a colleague. A tone, a word, a facial expression. And suddenly, that small moment expands. Did I say something wrong? Maybe they were upset with me. I should have handled that differently. Step by step, the body keeps walking, but the mind is somewhere else entirely. By the time they arrive home, they're not just tired from the day. They're tired from the story their mind kept telling. Have you ever experienced something like this, where a single thought quietly turns into many? And what's interesting is, this process happens so quickly, so automatically, that we rarely notice when it begins. The mind speaks, and we listen without question. But what if that voice is not always telling the truth? What if it's simply repeating patterns it has learned over time? Patterns of worry, patterns of self-doubt, patterns of trying to control what cannot be controlled. And because these patterns repeat so often, they start to feel like reality itself. But here is where a gentle shift can begin. Not by silencing the voice, not by pushing thoughts away, but by seeing them for what they are. Just thoughts, temporary, changing, not fixed, like clouds passing through the sky, appearing, shifting, and eventually fading. There's another quiet moment. The same person, sitting again by the window later that night. The thoughts are still there. The voice hasn't disappeared. But something is slightly different. Instead of being pulled into every thought, they simply notice it. A worry arises and passes. A memory appears and softens. For a brief moment, there is space between the voice and the one who hears it. And in that space, there is a hint of calm. Not because the mind has stopped talking completely, but because it is no longer being followed so closely. Have you ever felt that small gap, that quiet distance between you and your thoughts? It's subtle, easy to miss, but it changes everything. Because the moment you realize that you can observe the voice, you are no longer completely inside it. And that realization is the beginning of freedom. The mind may continue to speak. It may continue to narrate, judge, and predict. But you don't have to follow every word. And slowly, very gently, the noise begins to lose its weight. Not all at once, not perfectly, but enough for a little more space to appear. And sometimes, that small space is all the mind needs to finally begin to rest. 3. Why thinking feels like control. And this is where the mind begins to do something very convincing. It makes you believe that the more you think, the more in control you are. After noticing that constant inner voice, the way it keeps narrating, replaying, and predicting, it's easy to assume that all of this thinking must be helping in some way, because it feels like it is. It feels responsible. It feels like you're preparing, analyzing, staying ahead. It feels like you're protecting yourself from mistakes, from uncertainty, from pain. But if you look a little closer, something doesn't quite add up. How many times have you thought about something over and over again, only to feel more confused afterward? How often has trying to figure everything out actually made your mind heavier instead of clearer? And there's a subtle illusion here. The mind quietly tells you, if I just think a little more, I'll find the answer. If I replay this one more time, I'll get it right. If I prepare for every possibility, nothing will go wrong. And so, you keep thinking, not because you want to, but because it feels like the only way to stay safe. This is especially true in moments of uncertainty. When something is unclear, when a decision feels important, when a situation is out of your control, the mind steps in and says, let me handle this. And suddenly, what began as a simple thought turns into a long chain of analysis. You weigh every outcome. You imagine every scenario. You try to predict every possible result. And for a moment, it gives you a sense of control. But slowly, that sense begins to slip. Because the more you think, the more possibilities appear. And the more possibilities appear, the harder it becomes to feel certain about anything. Instead of clarity, there is hesitation. Instead of peace, there is tension. In Buddhist understanding, this is not because thinking is wrong, but because we misunderstand its role. Thinking is a tool, but when it becomes the only way we relate to life, it turns into a trap. Because life itself is not something that can be fully controlled through thought. There will always be unknowns. There will always be things that don't go as planned. And when the mind tries to solve what cannot be solved, it doesn't find peace. It finds exhaustion. There's a quiet scene that reflects this. The same person we've been following, sitting by the window again, late at night. Tonight, they're thinking about something important, a decision, a conversation, something that feels uncertain. At first, it seems harmless. They go over the situation once, then again, then from a different angle. What if this happens? But what if it doesn't? Maybe I should say this instead. No, maybe that would make things worse. The mind keeps moving, trying to land somewhere solid, but instead of arriving at clarity, it keeps circling. Time passes. The room grows quieter, but inside the noise becomes louder, and eventually, they feel more tired than when they started, not because the situation got worse, but because the mind kept trying to control something it couldn't fully grasp. Have you ever been there, trying so hard to think your way into certainty, only to feel even more lost? It's a very human experience, and it comes from a very understandable place. We all want to feel safe. We all want to avoid pain. We all want things to make sense. But sometimes, the way we try to create that safety is exactly what takes it away. Because the mind's version of control is not the same as true peace. Control says, I need to figure everything out. Peace says, I can be here even without all the answers. And that shift is not something the thinking mind easily accepts, because to the mind, and not knowing feels dangerous. But in truth, not knowing is a natural part of life. And when we stop fighting that, something begins to soften. There's a moment, later that same night. The person by the window pauses, not because they found the perfect answer, but because they're simply too tired to keep going. And in that pause, something unexpected happens. The thoughts don't disappear completely, but they slow down. There is a small gap, a quiet space between one thought and the next. And in that space, there is a different kind of feeling. Not control, not certainty, but a gentle sense of relief, as if, for the first time, they are no longer trying to hold everything together. Have you ever experienced that moment? When you stop trying to solve everything, and something inside you finally exhales? That moment is subtle, easy to overlook, but it carries a quiet truth. You don't always need more thinking to feel at ease. Sometimes, and you just need less holding on, because the more tightly the mind tries to control, the more restless it becomes, and the more willing you are to loosen that grip. The more space begins to appear, not all at once, not perfectly, but enough to remind you that peace was never hidden in the answers. It was waiting in the space between your thoughts. 4. The habit of holding on. And here is something even quieter, yet far more powerful than thinking itself. It's not just that the mind keeps speaking, it's that we keep holding on to what it says. If you remember that moment by the window, the thoughts didn't stay because they were strong. They stayed because something inside chose not to let them go. And this is where many people begin to see it clearly. It's not the thought that creates the weight, it's the attachment to it. You might notice this in your own life. A single comment from someone, and it lingers in your mind long after the moment has passed. An emotion arises, frustration, sadness, regret, and instead of fading naturally, it stays, repeating itself quietly in the background. Or maybe it's an outcome, something you hoped for, and something you wanted to go a certain way. And when it doesn't, your mind keeps returning to it, trying to change what has already happened. Holding on can feel subtle. It doesn't always look like struggle. Sometimes it looks like trying to understand. Sometimes it feels like not wanting to forget. Sometimes it even feels like protecting yourself. But underneath it all, there is a quiet resistance to what is. In Buddhist understanding, this is called attachment. Not just attachment to things, but attachment to thoughts, to emotions, to expectations. And the more tightly we hold, the less space the mind has to rest. There's a quiet scene that continues from before. The same person is still sitting by the window. The night has grown deeper now. The room is almost completely still. But inside, something is being held. A memory keeps returning, not because it needs to, but because it hasn't been released. They replay it again, then again. Each time trying to understand it differently, and trying to feel better about it, trying to resolve something that no longer exists in the present moment. And yet, the more they revisit it, the heavier it becomes. Have you ever noticed how holding on feels like effort, even when you don't realize you're doing it? It's like carrying something invisible. You don't always feel it at first, but over time, it weighs on you. And what makes it even more difficult is this. Letting go can feel uncomfortable. It can feel like you're losing something important, like you're giving up control, like you're accepting something you don't fully agree with. So instead, the mind chooses to hold on because it feels safer than releasing. But is it really safer? Or is it simply more familiar? Because if you look closely, holding on doesn't bring peace. It keeps the mind active. It keeps the past alive. It keeps the body tense, even in stillness. In Buddhist wisdom, letting go is not about forcing yourself to forget or pretending something doesn't matter. It's something much gentler than that. It's the willingness to stop carrying what no longer needs to be carried. There's a small shift in the scene. The person by the window pauses again. This time, instead of following the thought, they simply notice it. A memory appears, and for the first time, they don't chase it. They don't push it away. They just let it be there. And something interesting happens. Without the effort of holding on, the thought begins to lose its intensity. It softens. It becomes lighter. And slowly, it passes. Not because it was forced away, but because it was no longer being held. Have you ever experienced that moment when you stop gripping something and it quietly fades on its own? It's a very subtle kind of freedom, and it doesn't come from controlling the mind, but from relaxing the need to control. Because the truth is, The mind becomes restless not only because it thinks too much, but because it holds too tightly. And when you begin to loosen that grip, even just a little, something inside you starts to change. There is more space, more softness, more ease. Not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because you are no longer carrying everything with you. Letting go doesn't mean nothing matters. It means you are no longer asking your mind to hold what it was never meant to carry forever. And in that quiet release, the mind begins to feel something it hasn't felt in a long time. Not control, not certainty, but something much deeper. Relief. And maybe, just maybe, this is where true rest quietly begins to return. 5. The past and future trap. And this is where the mind quietly pulls you even further away. Not just into thoughts, but into time that isn't even real right now. After beginning to loosen your grip, after noticing how holding on creates weight, something else becomes clear. The mind rarely stays where your life is actually happening. It drifts backwards into the past, or forward into the future, and almost never fully here. You might recognize this in the simplest moments. You're sitting quietly, maybe with a cup of tea, nothing urgent to do, and suddenly a memory appears. Something you said, something you regret, something that didn't go the way you hoped. And without noticing, you're there again, reliving it, replaying it, trying to change it, even though it's already over. Or maybe the mind moves in the other direction, toward tomorrow, toward something uncertain, a conversation you're worried about, a decision you haven't made yet, a future that hasn't arrived, but already feels heavy. And in both cases, your body remains here, but your mind is somewhere else entirely. This quiet separation creates a very subtle tension. Because the present moment is simple, but the past and the future are filled with stories, and the mind keeps returning to those stories, as if something important is waiting there. Have you ever noticed how one small memory can pull you completely out of the moment you're in? Or how thinking about the future can create anxiety, even when nothing is happening right now? This is the trap. Not because the past or future are wrong to think about, but because we begin to live inside them. In Buddhist understanding, suffering often arises when the mind leaves the present and becomes attached to what has already passed, or what has not yet come. And because the past cannot be changed, and the future cannot be controlled, yet the mind keeps returning, as if it might succeed this time. There's a quiet continuation of that same evening. The person by the window is still there. But now, instead of one thought, there are two directions pulling them apart. A memory from years ago surfaces, something unresolved, something that still carries a trace of emotion. And for a moment, it feels just as real as it did back then. Then, almost immediately, the mind shifts. What about tomorrow? What if things don't work out? What if I'm not ready? And suddenly, they are no longer sitting peacefully by the window. They are somewhere between what was and what might be. And in that space, there is no rest. Have you ever felt that quiet restlessness? Not because something is wrong in your life right now, but because your mind is somewhere else? It's a very human experience. Because the mind believes that revisiting the past will somehow bring closure, and imagining the future will somehow bring certainty. But in reality, it often brings neither. Only more movement, more noise, more distance from the present moment. And the further we move away from now, the harder it becomes to feel at ease, because rest does not exist in the past, and it cannot be found in the future. It only exists here. But here often feels too simple for the mind, too quiet, too empty. So it keeps searching elsewhere. There's a small shift in the scene. The person by the window notices something. They notice how quickly the mind moves. how easily it leaves the present, and for a brief moment, they stop following it. The memory fades slightly. The future softens, and what remains is just the room, the quiet, the breath, the feeling of being here. Nothing extraordinary, but something feels different, lighter, not because all problems are solved, but because, for a moment, they are no longer carrying time with them. Have you ever experienced that? A moment where you're not thinking about yesterday and not worrying about tomorrow, just simply being. It's so subtle that we often overlook it. But within that simplicity, there is a kind of peace the mind cannot create, only uncover, because the present moment does not demand anything from you. It does not ask you to fix the past. It does not ask you to predict the future. It only asks you to be here. And the more you return to it, gently, without force, the less power those distant thoughts begin to have. The past loses its grip. The future loses its urgency. And slowly, the mind begins to settle. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough to remind you of something important. You were never meant to live in yesterday or in tomorrow. You were meant to live here. And perhaps rest has been waiting for you in this moment all along. 6. The body is still, but the mind is running. And this is where many people finally begin to notice something deeply unsettling. You can be completely still on the outside, and yet, inside, nothing has actually stopped. After seeing how the mind drifts between the past and the future, how it holds on, replays, and tries to control, there comes a moment where you pause and look at your body. It's quiet, it's resting, it's no longer doing anything. And yet, you're still tired. Not just a little tired, but in a way that feels like rest never truly happened. Have you ever gone to bed early, closed your eyes, and told yourself, "Tonight, I'll finally rest," only to find that minutes later, your mind has already begun running again? It starts gently, a small thought, a simple reflection, but then it grows, and one thought becomes another, then another. Suddenly, you're no longer lying in bed. You're inside a conversation from earlier. You're inside a situation that hasn't happened yet. You're solving, imagining, reacting, and your body remains completely still. This is the quiet disconnect. The body is ready to rest, but the mind doesn't know how. In daily life, we often assume that rest is something physical. We sit down, we stop working, we lie down at night. But true rest is not just about the body becoming still. It's about the mind coming home to the same stillness. And for many people, this is the part that never happens. So even after hours of sleep, there is still a feeling of fatigue, because the mind never actually paused. It simply changed environments, from the noise of the day to the quiet of the night. But inside, the movement continues. In Buddhist understanding, this is a gentle reminder of something important. And rest is not found in inactivity alone, it is found in alignment. When the body is still, but the mind is still moving, there is tension. But when the body and awareness come together, in the same moment, something begins to soften. There's a continuation of that quiet evening. The person by the window eventually moves to bed. The lights are turned off. The room fades into darkness. They lie down, hoping this time it will be different. For a few seconds, there is silence. Then, the familiar pattern begins. A thought appears, then another. Soon, the mind is moving faster than it did during the day, and even though the body is completely still, there is no sense of rest, just a quiet kind of effort happening inside. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it can be to lie still while your mind keeps moving? It's almost like running without ever leaving the bed. And what makes it even more difficult is this. We try to force the mind to stop. We tell ourselves, don't think. We need to sleep. Just relax. But the more we resist the movement, the more active it becomes. Because the mind is not something that responds well to force. It responds to awareness. There's a small shift in the scene. Instead of trying to stop the thoughts, the person simply notices them. A thought arises, and instead of following it, they stay with the feeling of the body lying there, the weight of the blanket, the rhythm of the breath, the quiet rise and fall of the chest. The thoughts are still present, but something has changed. They are no longer pulling attention away. And slowly, very gently, the gap between the body and the mind begins to close. For the first time, both are in the same place. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough, to feel a subtle shift. Have you ever experienced that moment when you stop chasing your thoughts and begin to feel your body again? It's quiet, almost unnoticeable, but within that moment, there is a different kind of rest. Not the kind that comes from sleep alone, but the kind that comes from presence. Because when awareness returns to the body, the mind no longer needs to run as far. It begins to slow down, not because it was forced, but because it is no longer being followed. And in that slowing, something deeper begins to emerge. A sense of grounding, a sense of being here, a sense of not needing to go anywhere else. The thoughts may still come and go, but they no longer carry the same urgency. They no longer pull you away so easily. And slowly, the body and the mind begin to move together again, in the same moment, in the same space. And this alignment is where true rest quietly begins, not in controlling the mind, not in escaping thoughts, but in returning again and again to where you already are. Because perhaps the reason the mind feels so tired is not because it has done too much, but because it has wandered too far away from the place where rest was always waiting. 7. Awareness, the first step to rest. And this is where something very gentle, yet quietly transformative begins. Not by stopping the mind, but by simply noticing it. After seeing how the mind keeps running, how it drifts through time, holds on, and tries to control, there comes a moment where you no longer want to fight it. Not because you've given up, but because you begin to understand something deeper. Force has never brought you rest. So instead, something softer appears. Awareness, not effort, not control, just noticing. You may begin to see this in the same quiet scene. The person is still lying there in the dark. The thoughts are still moving, just as before. Nothing has been fixed, nothing has been removed. And yet, something feels different, because this time, they are not trying to stop the thoughts, and they are simply aware of them. A thought arises, and instead of following it, they notice it. Another thought appears, and instead of reacting, they allow it to pass. There is no struggle, no resistance, just a quiet observing. Have you ever experienced that small shift, where instead of being inside your thoughts, you are watching them? It's subtle, almost too simple to believe it matters. But in that moment, something begins to change, because awareness creates space, and space is what the mind has been missing all along. Most of the time, thinking happens automatically. One thought leads to another, and before you realize it, you are caught in a chain. But awareness interrupts that pattern, not by breaking it forcefully, but by stepping slightly outside of it. In Buddhist wisdom, this is often where the path begins, not with changing the mind, but but with seeing it clearly. Because the moment you see a thought as a thought, it loses some of its power, and it no longer feels like something you must follow. It becomes something you can simply notice and let go. There's a continuation of that quiet night. The person notices their breath, not controlling it, not deepening it, just feeling it, in and out. And as they stay with that simple rhythm, the thoughts are still there, but they are no longer as loud. They come, but they don't stay as long. They pass, without leaving the same weight behind. And slowly, a new kind of experience begins to unfold. Not silence, but space within the noise. Have you ever noticed that when you stop chasing your thoughts, they begin to slow down on their own? It's not immediate. It doesn't happen all at once, but something softens. Because the mind no longer has to work so hard. It is no longer being pushed or pulled. It is simply being seen. And there is something deeply calming about that. Because for the first time, you are not trying to fix yourself. You are not trying to become someone else. You are just here, aware of what is happening. And in that awareness, there is already a kind of rest. Not complete, not perfect, but real. There's another small moment. The person notices a familiar thought returning, something that usually pulls them in. But this time, they don't follow it. They see it. They feel its presence. And then, they let it move on. And for a brief second, there is nothing. No past, no future, no story, just a quiet awareness. And in that moment, there is peace. Not because the world has changed, but because their relationship to the mind has. Have you ever touched that space? Even for just a second? That place where you are not thinking about life, but simply experiencing it? It's easy to overlook, because the mind is used to movement, used to noise, used to doing. But awareness doesn't require effort. It doesn't ask you to become anything. It only invites you to notice. And the more you return to that noticing, gently, without pressure, the more space begins to open. Thoughts still come. They always will. But they no longer carry the same weight. They no longer pull you away so easily. And slowly, the mind begins to learn something new. Not how to think better, but how to rest. Because awareness is not the absence of thought. It is the presence of stillness within thought. And that stillness has been there all along, waiting quietly for you to notice it. 8. You are not your thoughts. And this is where a quiet but life-changing realization begins to emerge. The voice in your mind is not who you are. After gently observing your thoughts, after noticing how they come and go without being forced, something starts to feel different. There is a small distance now, a space between you and the things your mind is saying. And in that space, a question naturally arises. If you can observe your thoughts, then who is the one observing? Because for most of our lives, we never question this. A thought appears and we immediately believe it. I'm not good enough. Something is going to go wrong. I should have done better. And without even realizing it, we take these thoughts personally. We carry them. We identify with them. We let them shape how we see ourselves. But what if, and these thoughts are not you? What if they are simply mental events, arising and passing, just like sounds, just like sensations? In Buddhist understanding, this is a gentle turning point. Suffering often deepens not because thoughts exist, but because we believe they define us. But when we begin to see thoughts as separate, something begins to loosen. There's a quiet continuation of that same night. The person is still lying in bed. The room is silent. The body is still. And the thoughts are still moving. But this time, something has changed. A familiar thought appears, something critical, something heavy. Before, it would have been followed immediately. It would have shaped the mood, the feeling, the night. But now, there is a pause. They notice the thought, not as truth, not as identity, just as something appearing. And for a moment, they don't react, they don't agree, they don't resist. They simply see it. And in that seeing, the thought begins to lose its weight. Have you ever experienced that moment? When a thought arises, but instead of becoming it, you remain as the one who notices it? It's subtle, but it changes everything, because the moment you stop identifying with every thought, you are no longer carried away by each one. A thought may say, "You failed," but something deeper within you remains untouched. A thought may say, "This will go wrong," but you no longer feel the need to follow it into fear. There is space, and in that space, there is freedom. Not freedom from thinking entirely, but freedom from being controlled by it. There's another small moment. The person notices multiple thoughts passing through. Some are negative, some are neutral, some don't even make much sense. And suddenly, they realize something simple, but profound. If all these thoughts are different, if they keep changing, if they come and go on their own, and how could any one of them truly be who I am? Like clouds moving across the sky. They appear, shift, and disappear. But the sky itself remains unchanged. In the same way, your awareness remains quiet, stable, unaffected. Have you ever noticed that no matter what thoughts pass through your mind, there is always something within you that simply sees them? That part does not judge, does not rush, does not hold on. It just knows. And that is closer to who you truly are. Not the thoughts, not the stories, not the constant inner voice, but the awareness behind it all. And when you begin to rest in that awareness, even for a moment, something softens deeply. Because you're no longer trying to fix every thought, you're no longer trying to become better in the eyes of your own mind. You're simply present. There's a gentle shift in the atmosphere. The thoughts are still there, but they feel lighter now, less personal, less urgent. They come, and they go, and the person remains, quietly aware, quietly still. Have you ever touched that space where you are not caught in your thoughts, but simply aware of them? It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels simple, almost ordinary. But within that simplicity, there is a deep kind of peace. Because the burden of being your thoughts has been quietly lifted. You don't have to believe everything you think. You don't have to follow every mental story. You can let thoughts pass without losing yourself in them. And slowly, very gently, the mind begins to rest. Not because it has stopped thinking completely, but because you have stopped holding on to every thought as who you are. And in that quiet separation, a deeper stillness begins to reveal itself. A stillness that was never disturbed, only overlooked. And perhaps this is where true freedom begins. 9. Letting thoughts pass like clouds. And this is where a very gentle shift begins to change everything. Not by stopping your thoughts, but by no longer resisting them. After realizing that you are not your thoughts, after feeling that small space between you and the voice in your mind, a new question quietly appears. What if you don't need to control your thoughts at all? Because, for so long, it has felt like that was the goal. To quiet the mind, to stop the noise, to get rid of the thoughts that disturb your peace. But if you've ever tried to do that, you may have noticed something frustrating. The more you try to stop a thought, the stronger it becomes. The more you push it away, the more it returns. It's like trying to calm water by pressing down on it. The surface only becomes more disturbed. And this is where many people begin to feel stuck, because they believe peace comes from eliminating thoughts. But every attempt only creates more tension. In Buddhist understanding, the path is not about resistance. It is about allowing, not forcing silence, but making space for what is already there. There's a continuation of that same quiet night. The person is still lying in bed. A thought appears again, one that used to pull them in immediately. Before, they would have followed it or tried to push it away. But this time, they do something different. They simply let it be. They don't agree with it. They don't argue with it. They don't try to fix it. They just notice it as it moves. And something subtle begins to happen. Without resistance, the thought doesn't stay as long. It rises, lingers for a moment, and then gently fades, like a cloud passing through the sky. Have you ever noticed that when you stop fighting a thought, it loses its urgency? Not immediately, not perfectly, but it softens. Because resistance gives thoughts energy. It tells the mind, this is important, stay here. But acceptance quietly removes that fuel. It says, this can pass. And slowly, the mind begins to follow that direction. There's another moment. A more uncomfortable thought arises. Something emotional, something heavier. For a second, the old habit returns. There's a slight tightening, a subtle urge to push it away. But instead of acting on that, they pause, they breathe, and they allow the thought to exist without interference. It's not pleasant, it's not easy, but something interesting happens. The thought doesn't grow, it doesn't spiral into more thoughts. It simply moves, like everything else. Have you ever experienced that moment when you allow a difficult thought or feeling, and instead of overwhelming you, it slowly passes? It's not because the thought disappeared instantly. It's because you stopped holding it in place. Unlike clouds in the sky, thoughts are always moving. But when we resist them, it's as if we try to grab them, hold them still, and demand that they go away. And in doing so, we keep them there. But when we let them pass, they follow their natural course, appearing, shifting, disappearing. There's a soft stillness beginning to grow now. The person lying there no longer feels the need to control every thought. Some thoughts are light, some are heavy, but all of them are allowed to move. And because of that, they no longer build up in the same way. The mind feels less crowded, less tense, more open. Have you ever noticed how much effort it takes to fight your own mind? And how different it feels when you simply allow things to be? It's not passive, it's not giving up. It's a quiet form of trust. Trust that not every thought needs your attention. Trust that not every feeling needs to be solved. And in that trust, there is a kind of ease. And not because life becomes perfect, but because you are no longer in conflict with your own experience. There's one more quiet moment. The thoughts continue to come, but they are softer now, more distant, like clouds moving slowly across a wide sky. And the person remains, not chasing, not resisting, just present. And in that presence, there is something deeply calming, because the mind is no longer trapped in struggle. It is simply flowing. And perhaps this is the quiet truth that reveals itself here. Peace does not come from controlling the mind. It comes from no longer fighting it. And when you allow your thoughts to pass, just as they are, you begin to discover something unexpected. The sky was never disturbed. Only the clouds were moving. And the more you rest as the sky, the more everything else naturally finds its way to stillness. 10. The quiet power of stillness. And this is where something almost invisible begins to heal you, not through effort, but through stillness. After allowing thoughts to pass like clouds, after no longer fighting the movement of the mind, a new kind of space quietly opens. At first, it may feel unfamiliar, because for so long, your mind has been used to noise, to movement, to doing something, even when there is nothing to do. So when stillness appears, it can feel strange, almost like something is missing. Have you ever sat in silence and felt slightly uncomfortable, as if the mind is searching for something to fill the space? That's because we often misunderstand stillness. We think it is emptiness. We think it is the absence of something. But in truth, stillness is not empty at all. It is presence, a quiet, steady presence that has always been there, beneath all the noise. In Buddhist understanding, this stillness is not something you create. It is something you uncover when the mind is no longer constantly disturbed. There's a continuation of that same night. The person is still lying there. The thoughts have slowed. The need to control has softened. The resistance has faded. And now, there is a pause. Not a forced silence. Not a complete absence of thought. But a natural stillness. The kind that arises when nothing is being pushed and nothing is being held. At first, it feels subtle, almost like the space between breaths, easy to miss if you're not paying attention. But then, it begins to deepen. The room feels quieter, the body feels heavier, more relaxed. The breath moves gently, without effort, and the mind, for the first time, is not trying to go anywhere. Have you ever experienced that moment when everything becomes quiet? Not because you forced it, but because nothing inside is resisting anymore? It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels simple, soft, almost like returning home, because stillness is not something new. It is what remains when everything unnecessary falls away. There's a gentle awareness now. The person notices the silence, not as something empty, but as something full of calm, full of space, full of ease. And within that stillness, there is a quiet kind of healing taking place. Not the kind you can see, not the kind you can measure, but something deep within the mind begins to recover. Because for the first time, it is not being pulled in every direction. It is not being forced to solve, to fix, to hold, to control. It is simply resting. Have you ever noticed how different it feels when you stop doing anything with your mind and just allow yourself to be? At first, the mind may resist. It may try to bring back thoughts. It may search for something to focus on. But if you don't follow, if you simply remain here, that stillness begins to grow. Not by effort, but by absence of effort. Like a lake settling after the wind has passed, the surface becomes naturally calm. And when the surface is calm, you begin to see clearly, not because you tried to understand, but because there is no longer anything distorting your view. There's another quiet moment. The person is no longer paying attention to thoughts at all, not because they disappeared completely, but because they are no longer important. What feels more present now is the stillness itself, the quiet, the ease, the sense of simply being here. And in that, there is a kind of peace that doesn't depend on anything. No answers, no outcomes, no control, just presence. Have you ever touched that kind of silence, even for a brief second? The kind that doesn't need to be filled, the kind that doesn't ask for anything. It's easy to overlook because it doesn't demand attention, but it's always there, waiting quietly beneath the noise of the mind. And the more you allow yourself to rest in that stillness, the more natural it becomes. Not something you have to create, but something you begin to recognize. Because the mind does not find peace by doing more. It finds peace by finally being allowed to be still. And in that stillness, something profound reveals itself. You were never as restless as you thought. Only the surface was moving. And beneath it all, there has always been a quiet place within you that knows how to rest. 11. Rest is not doing nothing. And this is where a quiet misunderstanding begins to fall away. What you have been calling rest may not have been rest at all. After touching that stillness, after sensing the gentle presence beneath the noise, something becomes clearer. Rest is not simply stopping what you do, because if it were, you would already feel at peace. You've taken breaks, you've laid down, you've stepped away from work, from people, from responsibility. And yet, the mind continued. It kept thinking. It kept replaying. It kept searching. So even in moments that looked like rest, something inside was still working. Have you ever found yourself scrolling on your phone for hours, telling yourself you're relaxing, but afterward feeling even more tired? Or sitting in silence, but your mind filled with noise? This is where many people begin to see it. Rest is not the absence of activity. It is the absence of inner struggle. In Buddhist understanding, true rest is not escape. It is not distraction. It is not avoiding what you feel. It is a return to awareness, a return to presence, a return to simply being without resistance. There's a continuation of that same quiet night. The person is still lying there. The stillness is present. The mind is softer now. But something subtle shifts again. They notice that even when there are no strong thoughts, there is still a habit of doing something. Trying to feel calmer, trying to stay present, trying to maintain the peace. And in that effort, there is a slight tension, a very subtle one, almost invisible. Have you ever noticed that even trying to relax can sometimes feel like effort? As if the mind is quietly saying, am I doing this right? Is this working? Should I be more calm than this? And in that moment, rest disappears again, because effort has returned. But then, something gently changes. The person notices this effort, not judging it, not trying to remove it, just seeing it. And as they see it, they stop trying. Not out of frustration, but out of understanding. There is nothing to achieve here, nothing to hold on to, nothing to improve. Just this moment, just this breath, just this quiet awareness. And as that realization settles, the tension fades. Not forced, not controlled, simply released. Have you ever experienced that shift? When you stop trying to feel a certain way, and suddenly everything feels lighter? It's not because something new was added. It's because something unnecessary was dropped. Because true rest is not something you create. It is something that appears when you are no longer interfering. There's another small moment. The person is no longer trying to quiet the mind, no longer trying to stay present. They are simply here. Thoughts may come, sensations may change, but there is no resistance, no effort to make this moment different from what it is. And in that, there is a quiet ease, a natural kind of rest, not the kind that comes from distraction, but the kind that comes from not needing to escape. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to constantly try to change your experience, to make things better, to make thoughts disappear, to feel more peaceful? And how different it feels when you allow everything to be as it is. This is where the meaning of rest transforms. It is no longer about doing nothing, because even doing nothing can still carry effort. True rest is not inactivity. It is non-resistance. It is being fully here, without trying to fix, control, or escape anything. And in that state, the mind finally begins to relax, not because it has been forced to stop, but because it is no longer being pushed. There's a deepening stillness now, and the person feels the weight of the body, the softness of the breath, the quiet presence of simply existing. Nothing needs to be added, nothing needs to be removed, and in that, there is peace, not dramatic, not overwhelming, but steady, gentle, real. Have you ever touched that kind of rest? Even for a brief moment? The kind where you are not trying to be calm, but you simply are. It's easy to overlook because the mind is used to effort, used to doing. But rest, true rest, does not come from doing more. It comes from finally allowing yourself to stop interfering. And in that quiet allowing, something becomes clear. You were never as far from rest as you thought. You were only searching for it in the wrong place. Because rest is not something you achieve. It is something you return to when you are fully here. And perhaps this simple return is all the mind has ever needed to finally be at ease. 12. Returning to the present moment. And this is where everything gently comes back to something very simple. The rest you've been searching for has always been here. After moving through the noise of the mind, after seeing the patterns of thinking, holding, resisting, after touching stillness, even briefly, there is one quiet truth that begins to stand out. The mind finds peace only when it returns to this moment. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, but now. And yet, this is also where the mind struggles the most, because the present moment feels too simple. There is nothing to solve here, nothing to replay, nothing to predict, just what is. And for a mind that is used to movement, that simplicity can feel unfamiliar. Have you ever noticed how quickly your attention leaves the present, even when nothing is wrong? Well, you could be sitting in a peaceful room, everything quiet, everything fine, and still, the mind drifts back to something that happened, forward to something that might happen, as if here is never quite enough. But what if here is the only place where rest is possible? Because the past only exists as memory, and the future only exists as imagination. But the present moment is where life is actually happening. There's a continuation of that same night. The person is still lying there, but now, instead of following thoughts, they gently return, not forcefully, not perfectly, just returning to the feeling of the breath, to the weight of the body on the bed, to the quiet space of the room. A thought pulls them away, and then they return again. No frustration, no judgment, just a soft movement. Back to now. Have you ever experienced that, where your mind drifts and you gently bring it back? Not once, but again and again and again. And this is not failure. This is the practice. Because returning to the present is not something you do once. It is something you do every time you notice you've wandered. And each return is a small moment of rest. Not dramatic, not perfect, but real. In Buddhist understanding, this gentle returning is the path itself. Not reaching some distant state of peace, but coming back to what is already here. There's a soft rhythm now. The mind moves and returns, moves and returns. And with each return, the distance becomes smaller. The gap between thought and awareness becomes clearer. And slowly, the present moment begins to feel more familiar, more natural, more like home. There's another quiet shift. The person is no longer trying to stay present. They are simply noticing when they are not. And in that noticing, they return. Without effort, without force. Like placing something gently back where it belongs. Have you ever noticed how different it feels when you stop trying to stay present and instead just return when you drift? It becomes lighter, softer, less like a task, and more like a rhythm. Because the present moment does not demand perfection. It only asks for your willingness to come back. Again and again. There's a deeper stillness now. The breath is soft. The body is relaxed. The mind still moves at times, but it no longer travels as far. It returns more easily. And in that, there is a quiet sense of ease, not because all thoughts have stopped, but because you are no longer lost in them. You are here, and in this moment, nothing is missing. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be solved. Just this breath, just this awareness, just this. Have you ever truly felt that, even for a brief second, that everything you were searching for was not somewhere else, but right here, when you stopped leaving? It's easy to overlook, because the mind is always looking ahead, but peace does not exist in the next moment. It exists in this one. And the more you return, gently, patiently, the more the mind begins to understand something new. It does not need to run, to find rest. It only needs to come back. And perhaps this is the simplest truth of all. You don't have to chase peace. You don't have to create stillness. You don't have to become someone different. You only need to return to where you already are. Because this moment, as quiet and ordinary as it may seem, is the only place where the mind can finally rest. Core message of the video. The rest you've been searching for is already here. Maybe after everything we've gently explored together, you're beginning to see something in a new light. That quiet exhaustion you've been carrying was never a sign that something is wrong with you. It was simply the natural result of a mind that has never been shown how to rest. For so long, you may have believed that peace was something to achieve, something waiting at the end of effort, at the end of solving, at the end of becoming better, calmer, more in control. But now, perhaps something softer is becoming clear. Peace was never hiding in the future. It was never waiting for you to fix everything. It was always here, beneath the movement of your thoughts. In Buddhist wisdom, rest is not something we create, and it is something that reveals itself when the mind no longer feels the need to hold, to chase, to resist. Not by force, not by effort, but by allowing. There is a quiet image you can return to. Maybe tonight, when everything around you begins to settle, when the noise of the day slowly fades, you find yourself in a simple moment. No expectations, no need to figure anything out, just sitting or lying down with nothing to solve. And for a brief second, the mind softens, not completely silent, but no longer pulling you away, just a gentle space. Have you ever noticed how even a few seconds of that kind of stillness can feel deeply relieving? As if something inside you finally lets go, even if only for a moment. That moment is enough. Not because it solves everything, but because it reminds you that rest is already possible. You don't have to chase it. You don't have to earn it. You only need to stop and allow yourself to be here. And maybe the most peaceful realization of all is this: you don't need to become someone else to feel at ease. You don't need to silence every thought. You don't need to control every outcome. You only need to stop holding so tightly. And in that gentle release, something naturally opens. A sense of lightness, a sense of calm, a quiet understanding that nothing is missing in this moment. If these reflections resonated with something within you, you're warmly invited to share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes, Simply putting your experience into words can be the beginning of deeper awareness. And if you'd like to continue exploring this kind of quiet understanding, you can follow Buddha's teachings audio so, a space where we gently return to stillness together. Thank you for being here, for taking this time, for allowing yourself to slow down, even just a little. And as you move into the rest of your day, or into sleep tonight, you might carry this with you. The mind becomes quiet, not when it finds all the answers, but when it no longer feels the need to ask.